The icy wind whistled through the dense woods surrounding the remote village, sending chills up my spine as I trudged through the snow-laden paths. The air was cold, crisp, and hauntingly silent, just as it always was in this isolated corner of the world. Though the landscape was beautiful in its untouched simplicity, there was an undeniable sense of foreboding that lingered in the atmosphere. I had grown up in this village, and even as a child, I could sense there was something off about it, something eerie and forbidden that my parents never spoke of. It was early spring, the snow beginning to melt away and giving life to the forest, revealing patches of verdant green beneath. The village was preparing for the traditional springtime festivities that marked the end of the long winter. Yet, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that crept into my thoughts as I observed the villagers busying themselves with preparations. Whispers of a secret ritual, a forbidden rite, had circulated for years. I never paid much heed to the rumors before, dismissing them as the fanciful imaginations of the village elders. But lately, the rumors seemed to take on a life of their own, growing louder and more frequent with each passing day. The villagers were unusually secretive, exchanging knowing glances and whispering among themselves in hushed tones. I could tell something sinister was afoot, and I intended to find out what it was. As night fell on the eve of the springtime festival, I made my way to the heart of the village, drawn by an irresistible urge to uncover the truth. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered rooftops and the dark silhouettes of the trees. My heart raced as I approached the town square, where a large bonfire crackled and danced, its flames licking at the night sky. The villagers had gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by its flickering light. They wore dark cloaks and hoods, obscuring their identities. In the center of the square stood an ancient stone altar, weathered and cracked with age. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized that the rumors might be true. This was no ordinary celebration. The village elder, a gaunt, hooded figure, raised his hands to the sky and began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The villagers joined in, their voices a chilling harmony that echoed through the night. I watched in horror as they carried out the ritual, their movements deliberate and practiced. The elder produced a ceremonial knife and cut his palm, allowing his blood to drip onto the altar. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the chant reached a crescendo. Suddenly, the fire roared to life, its flames turning an unnatural shade of green. The villagers' eyes glazed over, and their chanting grew louder, more frenzied. The ground beneath the altar cracked and heaved, revealing a dark, gaping hole. What happened next defied explanation. The undead began to rise from the earth. Men, women, and children long since deceased, their flesh decayed and twisted. They clawed their way out of the graves, their eyes vacant and filled with an insatiable hunger. The villagers recoiled in horror, their faces twisted in shock and disbelief. The ritual had gone horribly wrong, and now the village was overrun with the undead. Panic ensued as the villagers fled, but the undead were relentless, pursuing them with a nightmarish ferocity. I watched in horror as the villagers were attacked, their screams echoing through the night. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, and I was caught in the middle of it. With no time to waste, I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to navigate my way through the chaos. The undead were everywhere, their ghastly moans and shuffling footsteps closing in on me. I stumbled through the woods, my heart pounding in my ears. My only hope was to reach the outskirts of the village and find safety. I could hear the undead closing in on me, their guttural moans growing louder. I pushed myself harder, running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated chapel nestled among the trees. I hesitated for only a moment before rushing inside, slamming the heavy wooden door behind me. The chapel was dark and musty, the scent of damp wood and decay filling my nostrils. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw that the chapel was abandoned, the pews covered in dust and cobwebs. I stumbled toward the altar, my mind racing as I tried to think of a plan. The undead were closing in, and I needed to find a way to protect myself. As I searched the chapel for anything that could aid me, I noticed an ancient, leather-bound book on the altar. Intrigued, I opened it and my breath caught in my throat. The book was filled with strange, archaic symbols and incantations, the same language the villagers had chanted during the ritual. It was a book of dark magic, the very source of the village's curse. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, desperate to find a way to reverse the curse and stop the undeed. The pounding on the chapel door grew louder, the undead trying to break in. I needed to act quickly. As I reached the final pages of the book, I found an incantation that promised to banish the undead and break the curse. The instructions were clear, but the ritual required a sacrifice, a willing soul to take the place of the resurrected dead. A cold dread washed over me as I realized what I had to do. The only way to save the village and stop the undead was to offer myself as a sacrifice. I hesitated, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision. But as I heard the wood splintering and the undead breaking through the door, I knew I had no choice. With a deep breath, I began to chant the incantation, my voice echoing through the chapel. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I persisted, focusing on the task at hand. As I spoke, I could feel a strange energy building in the room, a powerful force that seemed to emanate from the very earth. The undead burst into the chapel, their hollow eyes fixed on me. They shuffled forward, their moans a chilling chorus. But as I continued the incantation, they hesitated, their movements slowing. The power of the ritual began to take effect. The room grew colder, and I could see my breath in the air. A blinding light enveloped me, and I felt an intense pressure in my chest. The undead recoiled, their flesh beginning to dissolve into nothingness. I could feel my soul being drawn away, my life force draining. As the ritual reached its climax, the undead were consumed by the light, their screams of agony echoing through the chapel. The curse was lifted, and the undead were banished back to their graves. But as the last of them disappeared, I knew my time had come. The light faded, and I found myself standing in a desolate landscape, the world around me distorted and strange. I was no longer in the chapel or the village. I was trapped in a liminal space, a purgatory between life and death. As I tried to make sense of my surroundings, I saw a figure approaching in the distance. It was the village elder, his face twisted with a sinister grin. "You did well, child," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "But you were a fool to think you could escape your fate." The elder revealed that the ritual had always been a trap, a means to sacrifice me and claim my soul for the cult's dark purposes. The village's secret had been exposed, but at the cost of my own life. As the elder disappeared into the shadows, I was left alone in the bleak, empty expanse, my fate sealed. The horror of the village's curse and the cult's sinister plans weighed heavily on my soul, and I knew I would never find peace. I had saved the village, but at a great cost, a cost I would bear for eternity.